I am really excited to be here. I love these readings, and I'm especially excited to get to say a few words about Amber Carpenter, though honestly, nobody can tell Amber's story better than she can. Y'all are in for a treat. It took a couple of attempts, but 3 years ago, we convinced Amber to join our MFA program, and honestly, the time has just flown by, mostly because I never get tired of reading her writing and having her in my classes. But also probably because I first met Amber virtually through the impersonal Zoom screen. And it feels like I've only just recently had a chance to work with her in a classroom space. It's a bit sad, honestly, to think that she won't show up in my workshops any longer. Even through Zoom, it was easy to see Amber's generosity of spirit, her kindness, and totally unpretentious love of her classmates' work. MFA programs are hard work. And creative nonfiction workshops are inherently just freaking weirdly personal and awkward. But Amber somehow always manages to make everyone in the class feel comfortable, valued, and embraced. She works really hard to set a positive and supportive vibe in the class, and that I always appreciate. She's also not afraid to offer up some difficult questions or haze me a bit and give me a hard time in front of the class, which makes me feel like she's not just a great workshop participant, but also one of my friends. When she started here, Amber already had an idea of what she wanted to write about, but also how she wanted to write about it. And part of the dance between mentor and student is figuring out how to amplify strengths and work on any weaknesses. The challenge with Amber is that there are so few weaknesses in her writing. She's able to craft a voice on the page that contains multitudes. It's breezy and funny, sarcastic and self-deprecating, but also incredibly wise and emotionally vulnerable. Take the essay she's reading from tonight, a piece I shared with my 15-year-old daughter, telling her, "You're gonna love this." And I was right. You'll likely laugh out loud in one paragraph and feel gut punched in the next. Amber writes about body image and relationships, friendships, and fascinations, and she does so with a kind of fearlessness that I greatly admire. From the very beginning, Amber has been driven to finish not just a thesis, but a book that is ready to go out to publishers. Frankly, she refused to settle for anything less and essentially forced me to go along with the plan. It wasn't really a hard bargain to make. I think I mostly just tried to stay out of her way while occasionally annoying the crap out of her by asking her to write more scenes. But I believe wholeheartedly her book will be published, and we'll see it on bookshelves soon. It's been one of my great honors to be a part of the process. I'm very proud and excited to welcome and celebrate the writer, Amber Carpenter.
So weird to hear someone say such nice things about you when all you do is like irrevocably like roast them so hard. Yeah, I'm not. Stephen is not joking. For some, I don't know what the threshold was, but I got really comfortable after Zoom school, and I do ask him some tough questions. So hi everyone. I think the first thing I want to acknowledge is the deep gratitude I feel being able to stand in front of you all tonight, to be able to celebrate this what already feels like this wild and incredible thing, and then to be able to celebrate via a reading with some of the most talented writers I know is a whole other gift. In no particular order, here are the people I'd like to thank for getting me here tonight. My father, who has taught me everything about gentleness and storytelling. My mother, who ceaselessly reminds me of her belief in my goodness. My stepfather, who has unwaveringly believed in my potential. My brother, for his understanding and appreciation of a dramatic narrative. Adrian, my partner, who's jumped into this life of loving a writer feet first. Loving you is the easiest thing I've ever done. The incredible community that is Fresno State's MFA program. I've studied under talented artists who also happen to be incredibly kind and warm-hearted people, and have gotten to dive into the beautiful work of my classmates time and time again. And I'm so happy you're all here to hear their incredible work as well. My sweet friends, here and also somewhere in the ether. You are all integral to my sanity, my success, and my healing. I love you all. Stephen and John, to have learned from the both of you has been such a privilege. The gentleness with which you hold all of our work has made this program feel like a place for creative nourishment and growth. And thank you for pushing us all into our artistic and empathetic power. Bryn, your kindness radiates throughout this entire program. Thank you for responding to my anxiety emails and for your belief in all of us. Jefferson, you are the glue that holds us all together. And a special shout out for Brenda Venezia for helping me understand and believe that this is the life I could have, and for being the best role model an adult woman could have for being a writer and an educator and just a genuinely good human. So I think that's everyone. So my work, like Stephen said, kind of revolves around body image and being really curious about identity and specifically existing in a fat body. As someone who has been a lifetime fatty, this is something I'm pretty well versed at talking about. So this essay is really just an excuse for me to talk about how obsessive I am about my 600-pound life. So yeah, it's called Show Me a Fat Bitch. The medication sits in my refrigerator somewhere between 30 and 40 degrees Fahrenheit, calling to me with the forbidden fruit of eventual thinness, smallness, something conventional. I imagine having a narrow body. I imagine hips that do not protrude in violent obtuse angles. I imagine bones that poke through my skin, proof that there is a frame holding me together, unburied by what others assume is years worth of Big Macs and double stuffed Oreos. And they're not wrong. Some of it is Big Macs and double stuffed Oreos, but that's not all it is. I've tried to pathologize my fatness from an early age. Because I'm a cliche, therapy has shown me that I've been a comfort eater since I was a small child. My first memories of binge eating are from as early as 8 years old, when I would hide away pieces off a grocery store bakery French bread in my bedroom for after dinner, or monopolize quiet Sunday mornings by eating cans of frosting my mother kept in the pantry for a rainy day. I did not know what I was eating to heal, but that, combined with genetic predisposal, made me the fat sibling. As I wandered into teenagerhood, I was showered with promises that I would thin out. My mother recollected her own childhood of chubbiness with her lean adult body, even after 2 children, as living proof that it could just be a phase. I watched my brother enter and exit his awkward phase, growing lean and tan, whilst my body stayed the same. There is magic in the promise of fatness as a phase. When you're a fat child, there is charm to your tubbiness. There is something innocent about your doughiness. No one cares that you can't do a cartwheel because gravity doesn't agree with you, and you can wear the same cartoon character graphic t-shirts that your friends do. You're the only one who knows that your mother has to reach all the way to the back of the rack to find your size. You do not know, however, that your time with the graphic tees will end sooner than that of your peers. In middle school, your time in the Kmart junior section runs out. The graphic tees no longer say things like talk to the hand or no boys allowed, but instead echo the musings of an older crowd. The shirts no longer have phrases, but are now billowing with Peter Pan collars and muted colors. For picture day in 6th grade, you show up in Lane Bryant business casual. Soon enough, your parents dissuade you from choosing shirts that show your belly or horizontal stripes. You find solace in the elastic waistband of some neon pink cargo pants your father buys you on a whim from Goodwill. One day you notice your wrist does not have the same knobby protruding bone that your thin friends have. When the nice rich family from church buys you several outfits from Limited Too, you cherish the 2 or 3 wears before the shirt shrinks above your belly. Your doughiness loses its charm. Boys do not ask you to dance at the mandatory post-football game mixers you're required to go to as a rec cheerleader. Actually, one did once, but it was because his sisters made him and there was already one chubby cheerleader crying in the wings. Eventually, the binge eating starts to make sense, and I start getting better at keeping it a secret. I do not know leftovers, only knew gorging myself on fries at Red Robin until I threw up the child's cheeseburger and Shirley Temple in the middle of the dining room because my tiny body could not physically hold any more food. My parents are laughing because that's a real thing that happened. This became a ritual. Eating at chain restaurants until I was sick, until I found myself kneeling in a bathroom stall, stomach solid and food trapped in my esophagus. I had not yet gotten to pathologize my fatness before a doctor pointed to a number on the far side of an XY axis, symbolizing my body's slight inferiority to everyone else's. The realization of my above normal BMI scared my mother. I began to feel the pressure to be smaller, to have a more agreeable number closer to the XY axis. Doctors began to look at me with sorry eyes. There was no longer innocence in my roundness, but instead some sort of patheticism. I was something to be fixed, and with each click of the 50-pound increments on the office scale, a symbol of how far gone I was becoming. I do not remember the first time it was prescribed to me, but the word itself felt like a curse. Obese. It was the nail in the coffin when I realized my body was different, clinically concluded as less than. It followed me from doctor to doctor until I stood in a stale doctor's office in my 20s. The rooms in Dr. Kulkarni's office are stuffy, with constellations and other themed childlike murals on the wall. In any given corner, there is a stack of children's books, one of them with a thin golden spine that describes Big Bird's first trip to the doctor. I wonder what Big Bird's BMI is. But then again, I guess it's sort of in the name. He knows he's big. It was no great surprise that came to him after puberty. Dr. Kulkarni walks in, the only woman besides my mother under the height of 5 feet who can completely terrify me. She never feels 5 feet tall because she is always wearing some sort of stiletto, always in a bright canary yellow or a loud fuchsia. Her earrings are ornate and her eyeliner is always perfect. For the most part, she is cold and unresponsive to my jokes, but sometimes I can get her to tell stories about her children, about her teenage daughter learning to drive. I understand her coldness. I understand that as a woman and a doctor, she has fought her whole life to be taken seriously, to be understood as a professional in the medical field. Despite her requiring me to get my blood work done every 3 months, I respect her in the way you respect your friend's kind of mean mother. You do not show your true self, your feral anger or joy or disgust, because to do that would be to allow her to perceive you. It's easier to remain two-dimensional. For the first few appointments, when Dr. Kulkarni berated me about my weight, I nod and tell her that I understood my health was at risk, that because I exist somewhere far off the axis, I am flirting with death in a way that my thin friends or mother or brother do not. She ends every appointment with the promise of acquiring more blood, with an appointment in 3 months, with a follow-up appointment in 3 months. Every 3 months, I'd sit quietly in a Quest Diagnostics, waiting for the phlebotomist to scold me for not drinking enough water that day. And every 3 months, Dr. K would find a different way to tell me I was subjecting myself to a life of misery and pain. 1,200 calories a day and at least 30 minutes of exercise, she'd say with her eyes peeking over her glasses, making just enough eye contact for the shame to seep into every pore of my body. And still, I do not think she ever intended for this to feel like a destructive shame. I do not believe she got joy out of telling me that someday my heart would give out on my clinically obese body. She felt as though it was her duty, and understanding that as a medical professional who had taken one of those weird HIPAA blood oaths in which they wear the white lab coats at doctors' conventions, it was her job to warn me of an existence I had acknowledged long before walking into her office at 22. And still, I never let her see me sweat. She'd only made me cry once before, and that time I'd made it to the car. But once, I was feeling just raw enough for the floodgates to open before I left the colorful astronomy-themed room she'd seen me in. Tears burned my eyes as I sat and listened to another lecture about how I needed to take care of my body, how I'm going to see an early grave if I didn't take care of the heavy flesh prison I'd been trapped in for over 2 decades. I understand now that Dr. K was simply trying to administer tough love, and despite any lack of bedside manner, it was because she cared. What she didn't realize, though, was that years before I had been assigned a number that made me clinically less than others. And whilst my path had been lined with empty cans of Duncan Hines frosting, it had also been lined with the promise of eventual thinness. That someday, despite genetics or the fact that I had sugary cereal on the weekends, I would make good on the promise to be smaller. I've tried to pathologize my fatness since I was a child. As an adult, I began watching my 600-pound life anywhere cable permitted me to. It became an obsession, a case study in what I could eventually become. Sure, I was fat, and it was often difficult to exist in a world made for people who weigh half of what I do, but still, I was nowhere near the state of disarray the subjects of the show would be in. I began to note patterns, things like sexual abuse or childhood neglect, often the narrative of a person whose childhood was taken from them in one way or another. Each anecdote features a picture of them as a child, a T-ball photo, or a team picture from soccer season. The case study itself felt grotesque, felt like I was looking at all of these cautionary tales of what I could be if I didn't get a hold of myself. These people were Dr. Kulkarni's worst nightmare, or was she theirs? My heart ached for them. These were real people, reduced to What if we all just did the wave? It's okay.
Dr. Kulkarni is their worst nightmare.
It's drama. I know what I'm about. My heart ached for these people, real people, reduced to Jiffy Lube waiting room fodder. To date, there are 10 seasons of My 600-Pound Life, with the series premiering in 2012. 134 episodes use the exact same narrative arc, the exposition, how the subject in question got to be the way that they are. The beginning of the episodes make a point of highlighting the pathetic living conditions of the episode's protagonist, but sometimes the scenario is varied. In some episodes, the subject is too far gone to be helped by concerned family members, and in others, they are surrounded by enabler caretakers who curate environments in which this kind of obesity is inevitable. Sometimes the subjects are overweight women turned cam girls who have found their way in the world being fetishized by men on the internet, and other times they are bedridden by health complications or overwhelming grief. In every story, there is a point of no return, a moment of pure shame that influences their decision to visit Dr. Yunan Nazardian, colloquially called Dr. Now by his patients, a renowned bariatric surgeon based in Texas. The subjects sometimes go so far as to move to the Houston area to receive continued care, as Dr. Now stages many visits throughout the process to ensure proper treatment is being administered. After hitting rock bottom, the patients visit Dr. Now with the commitment that they will eventually lose the weight, that they want their lives back. And as they say that, the camera pans over the T-ball picture one more time. Dr. Now only accepts the patients he sees a true commitment from and requires them to prove that they can lose a specific amount of weight before going through with the bariatric surgery. Herein lies the dramatic arc of the show. The patients almost always crack under the pressure, do not know how to handle the hard transition to 1,200 calories in 30 minutes of exercise a day. Their caretakers are beside themselves, unsure how to care for someone experiencing so radical a life change. Sometimes the prospective patients go to therapy to pathologize their fatness. While this narrative sounds repetitive, what makes it good TV, besides the millions of dollars poured into it and being created and executively produced by Nazardian's son, a television executive, is that the outcome is never the same. Initially, each protagonist eventually meets the primary goal of losing weight to prove consistency. What follows this is a scene with lots of blurring, while also featuring a close-up of Dr. Now soldering shut the laparoscopic wound in which the vertical gastric sleeve was inserted, the anesthesia-induced slumber of the patient, and the pounds of fat removed from the body in the surgery process, often weighed on a digital scale for the viewer to see the difference that has already been made. It is what happens after the surgery that creates good TV. Will the patient overcome the psychological damage they've endured to reach the promised land of thinness? Or will they reach for the Big Macs and double stuffed Oreos? Sometimes it's both. An uphill battle bookended with a story of finding self-worth in a new life outside of a 600-pound body, or other times a fluke. Our patient has not lost anything or gained the weight back, unable to acquiesce the trauma that landed them in that body in the first place. No matter what, though, there are always title cards explaining what happened to the subjects at the end of the episode. I wondered if this is how I looked to Dr. Kulkarni, some sort of pathetic, wounded person at the center of a lifetime of unaddressed trauma, unable to make peace with food in order to view it purely as fuel and not comfort. What would my narrative arc be? I never let Dr. Kulkarni find out, mostly out of pettiness, but also because despite the moment of softness when I allowed to cry, I realized she would never see me as a human outside of my fat body. And still, the dull ache of disappointment followed. Years later, I began seeing a psychiatrist at my therapist's recommendation. She gave me the first name she thought of, someone she'd worked with closely before, who she promised really cared about her patients. I met Dr. Hovav weeks later via webcam, her bright smile standing out amongst an otherwise bland office. The persistent conversations about my weight started small, with her gently asking about my sleep. I told her it was not as good as it once was, and she suggested I get assessed for sleep apnea. She told me a story about an old colleague, much older than her, that died in his sleep because he refused to use his CPAP breathing machine throughout the night. That was enough to scare me straight, partially because I'd had not more than 5 hours of uninterrupted sleep in more than 2 years, and partially because I was indeed waking up several nights a week gasping for air. I didn't want to be a cautionary tale. I soon came to expect comments about my weight at every appointment afterwards, ranging from, "Are you losing?" to "How's your weight?" I chuckled about COVID weight gain or immobilizing depression, and she'd get distracted enough to refill my Prozac prescription and quietly move on with the appointment. I thought I'd evaded her questions, the ones that I always wondered were in the scope of her care to ask anyway, until recently. When I thought I was home free, she didn't even inquire about it. "Let's talk about your weight," she said brightly as her megawatt smile beamed through the blue light of the computer screen. I attempted to hold my ground. This was not Dr. Kulkarni. I was stronger now, better educated. I listened to podcasts and read books about how BMI wasn't real. But still, I assured her that my recent blood work did not indicate any sort of alarm when it came to my weight. I was nursing a hefty fat gene and persistent sweet tooth, but had found balance in recent years through therapy. I was happy with my body, and I did not think my fatness was what was making me depressed. And still, she doubled down and told me about a relatively new weight loss medication that was being prescribed to diabetes patients. Something that works with the dopamine receptors in your brain to tell you you're not as hungry as you think you are. I had been worn down. I had lost the fight. I admitted defeat all the way to Rite Aid, shame paying for this stupid experimental education in order to also receive access to my regular SSRIs. The pharmacist handed me the box, cold and emblazoned with photos of semi-large humans going on walks or riding their bikes. She tells me it's a month's supply and to keep it refrigerated. I opened the box to find 4 injectable doses, something like an EpiPen wherein you find a nice fatty piece of your body to stick the needle into, feeding your body the solution to a lifetime of fatness. I knew the medication promised things like cheaper clothing or clavicles you could eat soup out of, but still, I didn't want it. I was no longer interested in solving the problem of my fatness or pathologizing down to the exact day when I decided thinness wasn't a choice for me. Instead, I tear myself away from my 600-pound life and dare the world to show me something else. Something I know that's real. Show me a fat bitch who hasn't fought to be seen, who hasn't ripped herself off the wall at a school dance to move her body anyway. Show me a fat bitch who was forced to run the mile for PE, her phys ed clothes drenched in sweat and mortification. Show me a fat bitch who hasn't been bought a drink in a musty club while her thin friends, magnetized by their conventionality, feel thick, rough hands on the smalls of their backs and wrapped around their waists. Show me a fat bitch who couldn't buy the same Acapulco dolphin shirt as her best friend on their family vacations, the one with the sequins and the screen printed palm trees. Show me a fat bitch who settled for a man who only kisses her in the car in the dark. Show me a fat bitch who was always a bridesmaid. Show me a fat bitch who loves and loves and loves despite everything outside her telling her not to. Show me a fat bitch. Let me hold her. Show me a fat bitch. Let me be her. Show me a fat bitch. Thank you all.